What if the Nazis won World War II, the dark world of a Gestapo empire? Imagine waking up in a world where the Second World War ends, but not with celebration, liberation, or justice. Instead, imagine a world where the Allies lose, where the Third Reich does not collapse, but expands. Where one of the most feared institutions in modern history, the Gestapo, evolves into a global intelligence force, overseeing an empire that stretches across continents. This isn't a glorification of a nightmare. It is a historical thought experiment, one that helps us understand the fragile line between the world we know and the one we narrowly avoided. Let's step into a timeline that almost became our own. For the Nazis to win the war, historians point to three key turning points that would need to unfold very differently. First, Britain would have to fall in 1940, either through a successful invasion or political collapse. Second, the Soviet Union would need to be defeated in a long and brutal war of attrition. And third, the United States would have to remain isolated, enter too late, or be unable to project enough power to tip the scales. In this alternate timeline, all three occur. Europe does not resist. Europe does not revolt. Europe falls, from the Atlantic coast to the banks of the Volga River. Once the continent is subdued, the Nazi regime begins constructing what it calls the New Order, a system of total political, cultural, and military control across the entire region. At the center of this system stands the Gestapo. In our real timeline, the Gestapo was dissolved in 1945. But in a world where the Nazis win, the Gestapo becomes the backbone of a vast authoritarian state. Its role expands dramatically. It no longer focuses solely on internal security within Germany. Instead, it becomes responsible for policing an entire continent. Historians studying Nazi plans for post-war Europe believe that every major European city would have been assigned its own Gestapo headquarters. Millions of people would have been placed under constant surveillance. Resistance movements would have been hunted down with extreme severity. Travel, communication, and education would be tightly controlled through ideology and fear. In effect, Europe becomes a massive security state, similar to the worst aspects of the Cold War Eastern Bloc, but operating on a larger scale and with far fewer restraints. And with victory, the regime seeks to expand its reach even further. The Gestapo transforms from a secret police organization into the intelligence nerve center of a superpower that rivals the United States. With Europe under firm control, the Nazis begin carving the world into zones of influence according to their long-term strategic plans. Greater Germany expands from France all the way to the Ural Mountains, administering dozens of newly conquered territories. In Africa, Germany, Italy, and their allies consolidate enormous colonial holdings into a centralized Axis-dominated bloc. Meanwhile, Japan dominates East Asia and the Pacific, forming a massive imperial network intended to rival anything in the West. This creates a world split between two primary superpowers, the Reich-Japan axis, controlling most of Europe, Africa, and Asia, the United States, isolated but heavily militarized, standing as the lone, major democratic power. The Cold War still happens, but instead of a rivalry between capitalism and communism, it becomes a geopolitical standoff between authoritarian fascism and liberal democracy. Many people expect such a world to stagnate technologically, but historians suggest something more troubling. The regime would aggressively pursue scientific development, particularly in fields that benefit state power. Without collapse in 1945, the Gestapo would likely oversee a continent-wide surveillance system. Rocket programs such as the W2 would continue, potentially making the Reich a leader in early space technology. Jet aircraft and experimental weapons would advance rapidly. The atomic race between the Third Reich and the United States would intensify, possibly decades earlier than in our reality. This would not be a space race motivated by exploration or pride. It would be a struggle for military advantage and control over the planet. Life within the Reich's borders would be heavily restricted. Censorship dominates every level of culture and education. Citizens are categorized and evaluated according to harsh ideological standards. The economy becomes an engine designed to fuel military power rather than consumer life or innovation. Technological progress continues, but personal freedom is almost non-existent. Despite the terrifying scale of this alternate empire, most historians agree on one key point. A Nazi victory would not guarantee a stable or eternal Reich. History shows that authoritarian empires often collapse because of internal pressure, overextension, economic strain, and resistance movements. Even if the Gestapo becomes the most powerful intelligence force in the world, it cannot fully control the political, ethnic, and social tensions within such a massive realm. Maintaining an empire that spans half the world is nearly impossible without constant upheaval. Eventually, something breaks. Perhaps the collapse looks like what happened to the Soviet Union. Perhaps massive uprisings sweep across Europe. Perhaps internal rivalries fracture the regime after the death of its leadership. Fear can hold a nation together for a time, but not forever. This exploration is not designed to dramatize or glorify one of the darkest chapters in human history. Instead, it offers a stark reminder of how differently the world could have turned out, and how close humanity came to a future built on oppression rather than freedom. Our world today, with its liberties, debates, and open societies, exists because the Allies prevailed, because fascism was defeated, and because ordinary people refused to live under tyranny. Alternate history is powerful because it shows us not only what might have happened, but why the choices our world made were so important. This is the world where the Nazis won, a world held together by fear, a world eventually destined to crack under its own brutality, and a world we are fortunate never to have seen.